Right. Hey, good evening, everybody, and welcome to Season 2 of our Innovate HPE MOOC. And this season, we are building the whole thing around our 2018 keynote speaker who will be joining us at Seven Springs Convention in the fall. Joe Sanfelippo, author of the great book Hacking Leadership, is with us tonight. We're hoping to be joined by a special guest, author of Cultivate, Jimmy Casas. We're going to work with him on getting him the right link here in a few minutes, and he'll be joining us to talk a little bit about hacking leadership and his stories with building culture. And I'll tell you, if you haven't seen Joe before, he is a phenomenal keynote speaker. If he's ever speaking near your house, if you're not from Pennsylvania, I highly recommend getting it. You'll laugh getting in to see him because you'll laugh, you'll cry, you'll learn, and it'll be an amazing experience. And since we are building this whole season around hacking leadership, I just want to kind of make a point with leadership, because leadership can be oftentimes confused. It says, well, that's what administrators do, but we're all leaders. If you're a district leader, a superintendent, you're a leader of principals. If you're a principal, you're a leader of teachers. If you're a teacher, you're a leader of students. And if you're a pre-service teacher, you're a leader in training. So leadership is leadership. It really doesn't matter what your position is. And all of this stuff can apply in the classroom as well as the school. And without further ado, I would like to have Joe just take a few minutes and introduce himself, tell us a little bit about himself and where you're from and so on. Thanks for being with us, Joe.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it, and for the very nice intro. And we just sometimes it's just, we love the opportunity to just get out in front of people and talk about the cool things that are happening in our place. I live in Fall Creek, Wisconsin, which is northwest Wisconsin, about an hour and a half east of Minneapolis, St. Paul on the good side. And we are the home of the Fall Creek Crickets, the mighty Crickets. Like, we'll annoy the heck out of anybody if you give us the opportunity. And we are a district of 825 kids. We are one building, K-12, in a village of 1,300 people. And I often say the best thing about living in Fall Creek, Wisconsin is on Friday night I know where everybody's going to be, and the worst thing about living in Fall Creek, Wisconsin is on Friday night I know where everybody's going to be. And part of that is the idea that we have this incredible opportunity to build culture in a place. And the stuff that we talk about in Hacking Leadership, and my co-author Tony Sinanis, who's a superintendent in Hastings on Hudson in New York, one of the things that we really try to convey to people is the stuff that's happening here is one of those things that it's not just about Fall Creek. I mean, the things that are in Hacking Leadership, anybody can do in any size district, in any setting, and hopefully it's going to improve their leadership capacity. So I've been a superintendent for 8 years. No, I'm sorry. I've been a superintendent for 7 years. I've been in the district for 8 years, and wouldn't change it for the world. Just had a really wonderful experience.
Well, thanks so much, Joe. I know one of the big things that you kind of open with in the book, and that we've seen as a topic in a lot of these educational leadership books in the past few years, is it all comes down to relationships. And when you establish that relationship, whether it's with a student, with a teacher, with a peer, with a colleague, you kind of have more of that social capital built up to have those tougher conversations. So how has that helped you move forward with your staff to give them support? Whether it was at Fall Creek or in other experiences that you had before, how have those relationships really helped you move staff that need the support to move forward?
I think one of the things that we all have to understand about teachers is that there's not a lot of people out there that are just kind of going out there and trying to be average. I mean, everybody's trying their hardest. I think a lot of people that have fallen off of and Jimmy talks about the idea of excellence, and everybody has to strive for excellence. People that fall off of that are often falling off of that because they don't have the support to build up on that. I mean, like I said, there's not a lot of people that, I don't think any teacher wakes up in the morning and says, I can't wait to be average today. I mean, like it's like going to Denny's. Like, nobody goes to Denny's. You just end up there. I don't think that it's like, we have to think about it differently, right? Like, it's the opportunity for us is, if we're not supporting those people to get better in their job, then they fall back because they don't have the support to try to get better. And that's a leadership issue, and it happens in your classrooms too. If you see kids kind of skating, and you think to yourself, well, they're not putting in the effort. Well, why? They might not feel supported. If they don't feel supported, it means that they don't have a great relationship with you. And that's something that you know, as the leader have to take ownership of. And that was for me, it was just more about how do we create, if we're going to create better leaders, we have to create relationships with those people who lead. And I just keep thinking about that over and over again. And hopefully it'll kind of, you know, work from there.
Thanks, Joe. I have enjoyed stalking you through YouTube and YouTube clips and Twitter. Your energy and success at Fall Creek is inspiring. Given that Fall Creek is a smaller organization, what advice would you give to leaders in larger organizations with regards to implementing some of your hacks? For example, the district where Todd and I are, we're about to hit 9,000 students. So there's a lot more leaders in the equation, and just a bigger organization.
Yeah, the first thing that I would tell you is that we've used this book with districts of 800 kids and districts of 70,000 kids, and you know, in Texas, and the process doesn't change. The process is about, you know, capacity building and giving people the opportunities that they didn't think possible prior to you getting there. And so, you know, I think all the stuff that's in there can be done on an individual level to build capacity on a greater level. Like you can change your mindset by just, you know, writing a couple notes to start your day. I mean, or making positive phone calls at the end of your week. You know, I know, when we were talking about this before, I know that there are times that my mind's not in the right place. And a lot of times that happens because I didn't start my day off the right way, right? Like, so if I start my day off writing 2 positive notes to people and deliver those notes, my day is in a better spot because I'm always looking for the things that are going to make the people around us better. And the same thing with making positive phone calls home. That's such an easy thing to do. At the same time, it's like, well, we don't have time for that. We don't have time for that. You don't have time. You have time. You're choosing. We're getting to the point where we're just choosing what we spend our time doing. And everybody's got a choice in terms of that time. And a lot of times we think, well, if that's going to take me 5 minutes, I don't have 5 minutes. You have 5 minutes. We talk a lot about the idea that you build or kill culture in 30-second increments. And the idea is simply this. If you take that mentality, that 30-second mentality, that gives you 960 opportunities to build relationships with people every day. 960. You can't find 2? Yeah, you can. So figure out ways that you can make, make people feel like that's the place that they want to be. And I don't think that's school size specific. Now, there are some logistical things that make it harder in larger organizations, you know, when it comes to some of the red tape that goes on. But there are more leaders in the world that will use that as an excuse to not do anything because they don't think they can, rather than trying to find a way to power through and try something different. And that's just unacceptable. You know, I mean, if we want people to move forward as leaders, no matter if you're leading classrooms or if you're leading schools or if you're leading districts, you have to be willing to step out and try to and support people in something that they want to do that's going to take a risk. And if you don't do that, then they're not going to grow.
Ryan, I saw you type in some notes. Did you want to expand that? We have Jimmy with us now. Welcome, Jimmy Casas, author of Culture Eyes. Thanks for being with us tonight, Jimmy.
Hey, you're very welcome, Todd. Thanks for having me. Sorry about the little technical glitch there, but we're good to go now.
Well, now I'm done talking. Every time I get on a hangout with this guy, it's over. So it's been fun joining you guys tonight. And here's Jimmy Casas for the rest of the time.
I was just thinking the same thing. I'm not sure what I have to add because I just heard what Joe said. I'm like, ditto. That's all I got to say, ditto.
Yeah.
That was on page 43 of Culture Eyes. You can talk about that at the next books thing.
That's good. You know what a ditto is? I know you're like 30, so I'm not sure.
Very funny, Todd. Very funny. No, what is it? No, I'm kidding. No, you know what, Joe? The one thing, and when we were kind of chatting, and we could have filmed and gone live 10 minutes before we did with the conversation that we were having, and I thought the one thing that you said that was really powerful about your notes is how if you're not doing it, you feel lethargic about it, and it's like where somebody has what Todd would call the yeah but-ism, where, you know, there's always an excuse or a reason not to do something. When you're not doing that, you're feeling the effects of that. So it doesn't take more time, but the reward that you're going to get from it is well worth it.
I wholeheartedly agree. And it's a choice that we make, and we're like, the difference between good to great isn't always a great innovative idea. It's consistency. That's what it is. Like, everybody can plan a great lesson, but if it's the only time you ever talk about it, like everybody's got that one lesson that they use when somebody comes in to evaluate them. Like if that's the only great lesson that you have, then we got to talk, man. Like that's it's just like moving to the next level. And Jimmy talks a lot about that, like the idea that the choice is ours to make, and we're making it every day. If we're not choosing to make things better, then we've already chosen to make things worse.
And with you too, you're not sitting in an office writing these books and here's how you do this, and you're writing about it, you're sharing, you're telling, you're helping, and you're living it every day. So, these kind of things are possible, and it's something that can be accessible to anyone in any sort of leadership position. I had a professor in grad school, and he'd be all day up until the last, where people were already at the social, and people would always be like, Bob, what are you doing? Like, come out, meet out. We're going to happy hour, whatever. And he would say, like, he'd call it pearl hunting. He's like, if I could get one thing, and like, be it from a session, from a conversation in a hallway, one thing that I could take and grow and make myself better, or, innovate my classes, then it's a success. And I think that's what's important, is people are tuning in and they're listening to this, and they think some of these ideas are these like pie in the sky ideas. They're not. How can you take those ideas and make it work for you? Because not every district's the same. We all have different challenges, whether it's financial, whether it's space, whether it's staffing. We all have challenges, but at the end of the day, good leadership has a greater impact than we'll ever know. So, these types of things are worth finding a way to make happen.
Agreed.
So Joe and Jimmy, I'll throw this at you as well. I have a kind of two-parter to this. Joe, you talk about building culture in 30-second increments, and Jimmy, you're right. You wrote the book on culture before you got here. Joe was talking about how phenomenal it's one of the best education books out there, and I agree, and I can't wait to read it. Through my travels, I've seen a lot of schools and school leaders say, I can't do all this, but the leadership team above me manages rather than leads. So they kind of, here's the thing, go do it. Can you talk a little bit about how you can build culture in environments like that, where the top, maybe the district office, is kind of not visible or not bought in terms of building culture? How you can kind of get around those little barriers?
Jimmy, I'm going to let you start with this, but before Jimmy goes, can we just note his T-shirt? Go Crickets.
Go Crickets.
Yeah, now we're talking.
I was just going to do that for you, Joe.
That's my boy right there. All right. I'm not even going to let you go first on that one. You go right ahead, man.
Wait, Joe, won a contest.
Yeah. Well, first of all, hi, Jessica. Nice to meet you. Joe, good to see you, my friend. And Todd, thank you very much. So let's just start from this mindset, first of all. I think, first of all, we have to recognize and appreciate the fact that everybody in the organization has the ability to lead. We all have that capacity. Now, whether we take advantage of that, or whether we're nurtured, or whether we believe we're working in an environment that allows us to exhibit those qualities and those attributes, that's a different situation. But let's just start from the mindset that everybody has the capacity to lead, number one. And let's go with the notion that, that leadership was never meant to be in isolation, right? In other words, every one of us has that capacity. So how do we begin to build that? That's the first thing. So as we go out to nurture that leadership, knowing that it's never meant to be a committee of one, I do believe that our role as leaders is to cultivate more leaders, right? And unfortunately, what happens, at least in my experience, Todd, and I can only speak from personal experience for me and then watching what happened to others, is when we go or we made the decision that we want to be building leaders, we all did it probably for the most part, the same reasons. Number one, I felt like I could go in and do that work. I felt like I had ideas, and there were ways that I was seeing it done that I just thought we could be so much better. And so we go in with all this energy and this enthusiasm, this passion that we're going to go in there and be the change and make these systems changes and so forth. And then we get in there and we realize that, man, this is harder than I thought it was, right? Because there's all these challenges that come with it. And I think the biggest challenge is the fact that the variable is always changing. So anytime you're dealing with students, Well, that variable changes all the time. And of course, as a supervisor, as a building leader, the variable your staff is always changing as well. So I think with that comes some significant challenges, which means it takes a tremendous skill set to be able to manage all those moving parts, but also to manage all those personalities and all the personal agendas and all the issues and the history and the traditions and everything else that comes at you. And so it takes a tremendous skill set. Well, the reality of it is when we went to school to become leaders, right, we didn't recognize the challenges that were going to be before us. And not only that, it's really hard to simulate those challenges because every community and every school community has its own unique culture, and it has different variables that are always changing. So it takes a tremendous skill set to be able to quickly make those adjustments, to be able to adapt. And so one of the things I talk about is in this moment, what does this situation require of me as a leader? So if it requires me to be empathetic, I need to be empathetic. If it requires me to be courageous, I need to be courageous. If it requires me to have a difficult conversation, I need to have that skill set. If it requires me to be a cheerleader, I need to have that skill set. If it requires me to step back and let others lead, I need to be able to do that. And so those are significant challenges for leaders. And so when we think about the people above us, we have to remember that I believe that all people have good intentions and they are coming from a good place and want to do the right thing. Maybe they don't have the skill sets. Maybe they're not necessarily in a place to make those best decisions, but we have to come at it from a place to believe that people have good intentions and we shouldn't be making assumptions. And so the only way to do that is to sit down and have conversations and to share with people what we're thinking, what we're feeling, what we'd like to see, because nobody can fix what they don't know. And this is about treating people fairly. And in order to treat people fairly, you have to bring it to their attention, what your expectations are, what you understood of what was being requested, where you'd like to see this go. So how do we do this through conversations? So those that are struggling with leaders above them, I always encourage them, you need to go have the conversation. People can't fix what they don't know. And you owe it to the organization that, guess what? Superintendents cannot do this work by themselves. So we as principals have a responsibility to help them get better. Principals cannot do this job alone. So teachers have a responsibility to help their principals get better. Teachers cannot do this job, and it just goes on, right? And so if we all had that mindset that our role is also to help others get better in the work that they're doing, I think our cultures would just be so much healthier and so much stronger because, as my good friend used to say all the time, it's just better to be kind than it is to be right.
So powerful, so powerful.
Joe, you're wicked smart.
Joe, how about your thoughts? Anything to add?
Well, I want to just think about what Jimmy said in terms of the mindset that he's talking about, and the fact that one of my big things is that we're intentional about the mindset that we carry. And when he was talking, one of the first things that he said was that he believes that everybody has good intentions. So that's a mindset. And if you believe that, then you're out to help those people, because let's be honest about the narrative of public education. It's not great. And so if you're always getting battered from the outside about why you're not good at your job, or this wasn't good, it was good enough for me when I was a kid, so it must be good enough for these kids now, or whatever the case may be, then if you're not taking care of each other and trying to get each other better as you move out of that, the minute that you walk out the door, you become part of that world that doesn't really reflect really great on the work that you do. And if you're intentional about trying to help people get better, then that makes all of your movements different along the way. So you're trying to help people get better in whatever role they're in. And that's a big deal. And a lot of times it's a mindset shift. It starts with a mindset shift and then works its way to a spot where you're actually changing your own behavior based on the fact that your mindset says you're there to help other people, whoever those people are.
As I was reading and kind of having a conversation with my principal today, he's a big fan of yours, Jimmy, by the way. He's like, since he's read your book, that's all I ever hear about is in this book chapter it said this, and in this chapter it said that. So I know he's watching tonight. But anyway, one of the things,
I can set him straight if you want me to. Just let him have one conversation with me.
I'll talk to him. Give that boy to me. Give him to me one time. Joe. I'll talk to him.
Hell, Jessica's known me for 5 minutes. She could probably make all that nonsense go away pretty quickly. I'm so sorry to hear that.
No, I'll tell you what's interesting is when you read all the education books that I've read, like in the last several years, they all keep coming back to one thing, and it goes back to relationships. And one of the things we were kind of having this conversation today about is that's kind of the one thing that to me, in a way, seems like that's the piece that some people have natural ability or natural tendency to it. And whereas a lot of the other things that you read, you can train, or it's a learned skill. So how would you help a teacher, an administrator, anybody that you're working with get better at relationships? I mean, they're working in the people business, but we've all worked with people who maybe don't have the best relationships. So what can we do and to help them, or give them a few things to go on?
I think Jessica should start with this one. So
you want me to start with it? You know, I think now I transitioned into this role from being a teacher. So I've been the executive director for a state association for about a year. And I think of myself as a young teacher, and how I came out of college guns a-blazing, and, you know, I knew everything, and I knew how phys ed should be and this and that. And I was like, wow, that is a really not good way to approach any sort of leadership role as a teacher, because it ended up being more detrimental to the relationships that I had with people that I worked with, because I wouldn't have wanted to work with me, you know? So that was kind of a big awakening as far as your role as a leader, that you want people to do things because you're inspiring them, not in spite of you because of something that you've done that makes them want to do the exact opposite. So that to me is something that I feel like I'm constantly working on right now is, you know, I need to have that mindset more so of everyone has the right intention of being there. You know, you don't get into education, you don't become an administrator, you don't work for a nonprofit association like we have unless you really truly believe in what you're doing and want to make a difference. So, you know, I feel like a very green leader. You know, this is my first big leadership role. So I'm going to watch this back and write down a lot of the notes that you guys have said, just so I can take it and learn myself.
Yep. Joe, I can jump in if you want me to.
Yeah, please do. You go ahead. Yeah, then I'll wrap it up. Yep, go ahead.
Or we can go the other way. It doesn't matter. You can go. Actually, you go first. Go ahead.
Well, I think that one of the biggest things when it comes to relationships is actually investing in the idea that you don't know all the time. I mean, a lot of times we tend to gravitate towards people we have common interests with, but yet at the same time, you still have to build relationships with those people that you don't have common interests with. I find myself, you know, I'll end up in classrooms almost inherently. I'll walk to classrooms throughout the course of the day. When, like today, I walked into 3 classrooms just because I knew that the person that I walked into the classroom with is going to want to talk about the national championship game tonight. Like, those are things and I just know that, so I can walk in and have that conversation. It's harder to walk into a conversation that you don't know that piece. And it kind of comes down to, for me, what have you done to invest yourself into their world? One of my professors in college, during my doctoral program, her name is Nancy Blair. She said one of the coolest things that's ever been said to me in a class or anywhere actually is we were talking about the gift of service, you know, and she said the greatest gift of service that you can give to another human being is for the time that you're with them, they are the center of your universe. And if you keep that in your mindset, the idea that they are the center of your universe in that moment, then that's going to build a relationship with that person, because you're more about them than you are about you. And if you're more about them than you are about you, then that conversation is going to turn to a better relationship.
Yeah, I love that point that Joe makes. And ironically, Joe and I had this discussion when we first met, that one of our commonalities is we both had Nancy Blair as a professor. So great lady at Cardinal Stretch College, great leader, just learned a ton from her. So, you know, it's funny when you bring up the relationship piece, because I mean, I think those are, I just had a Google Hangout this afternoon, Todd, and you know, it's interesting because when you look at John Hattie's effect size, that relationship piece isn't even in the top 5, which is kind of interesting, right? And so, but I still think, you know, I think knowing the cultures and knowing our organizations, I've always believed that the foundation to every organization that has a healthy culture just focuses on that important piece of the relationship piece. But one of the things that we often talk about, and Joe and I have talked about this, is there's also a tiered process to the relationship. So if you think about leadership, one of the things that no one really teaches us in leadership school, right? And it's interesting because I'm listening to Jessica here, and I tell people all the time, I wish I could have my first 12 years back, Jessica, because the reality is you're just trying to figure out as you go along But unfortunately, because of our roles leading organizations, we don't get a lot of free passes. And every mistake we make, we're taking some hits along the way. And then eventually people lose confidence and begin to make judgments that we don't have the skill sets to be leaders. Yet the reality of it is, even whether it's Joe teaching at Viterbo or Jimmy teaching at Drake University, trying to help our young administrators come into the field, the reality is the only thing we can do is try to simulate as much as possible what our principals are going to experience when they go into these buildings. But the reality of it is the learning curve is so great that you're going to have to learn as you go along. And hopefully if we can surround them with good mentors, and I think that's where we're lacking, is we don't have the strongest mentors available right now in the field right now to support our young administrators. Because the reality is most administrators are busy around their own buildings, right? They have good intentions, they want to support, but at the end of the day, they're running their own buildings. So when I think about relationships, here's three things I try to share with people. Think this way: relationships, relationships, relationships. The first tier is getting to know the kids, right? It's important that we get to know their strengths, their talents, their fears, their frustrations, their anxieties, their passions, all these things that we really try to get to know our students. And that's obviously critical and certainly important. But I think what we forget about is there's still two other tiers that when you really want to elevate, in my opinion, to the next level of excellence in your culture, is that we also have to make sure that we're allowing children to get to know us, right? In other words, what I mean by that is, do they know our core? Do they know what we believe? Do they know what we'll go to the wall for? Do they know what we are passionate about? Do they know, the types of things that we expect? In other words, do they just know our core? Do they know me, Jimmy Casas? What's in here? What gets me up in the morning and jacked up to go to work every day to get in front of students and do my very best to teach them? So they know what to expect every day we get in our classrooms. And what I love about that is kids don't have to guess anymore. Am I going to get happy Jimmy, or am I going to get cranky Jimmy? Am I going to get Jimmy with who's frustrated today, or am I going to get this Jimmy? And so I tell people, when people know your core, it also allows us to make better decisions, because your decisions will come from your core. And in other words, you think about, well, what do I believe in? And that's what I should be making my decisions on. And then the last piece is, I think to really elevate your cultures is we got to create opportunities for our kids to get to know one another. Because once our kids get to know one another and we are purposeful and intentional in allowing those relationships to be built between student to student, and that has to come from the adult driving that through activities and through conversation and through dialogue and however we set up our classroom, then those conversations will eventually lead to kids knowing one another, which means no longer will they be as judgmental, they won't be as mean, perhaps they won't bully. And again, none of these things are absolute, right? There's no perfect systems. But if we can begin to minimize those things and be more intentional, then what we create is a classroom of empathy. And once we create empathy, then kids are going to be kinder to one another. Kids are going to be more willing to volunteer. They're not going to be feared that they're going to look dumb, because they believe that their classmates know them. And once we know them, then they're going to treat them in a kinder way just because they know them. And the last thing I'll just quickly say is we have to remember as leaders, Joe, Jessica, myself, that our teachers, our staff are like our students. So if we're going to expect our teachers to do this in the classroom, then the question is, are we modeling it as building leaders and doing the same thing with our staff, getting to know our staff, allowing our staff to know our core, and more importantly, are we creating an environment where our staff gets to know one another so they work better with one another and hopefully with the same purpose, and that is to serve our students each and every day.
Well, do you have a microphone over there that you could drop after?
Jessica, Joe would tell you the same thing. That took me 12 years to start to kind of figure that out, and I still haven't figured it out. I'm still trying. So.
Well, it's, and when you focus on that, and I know, Joe, one of the hacks where you're talking about centering your school around children, that you really have the opportunity to make a community. And, especially for the students that will leave that school community and go off into the world and, do their own thing and do wonderful, wonderful things in the world. What an experience for them to be able to walk away from a system like that. I mean, they are prepared for the world and ready to take it on. So, Joe, I know when you were talking about the hack of centering the school around the children, you talk about how we often try to make decisions with the best of intentions, but we're still teacher-centered. So when we're talking a little bit about pushback, how can you still encourage people to break through that wall and really get the students in on the classroom decisions?
I think the first thing you do is you have to give them ownership of the process in some capacity. And I think that a lot of times teachers aren't going to allow students to own their work unless you allow teachers to own their work. So they don't, it's easier for them to have kids, to help kids own their own process if they know what it feels like for themselves. And that's why, that whole process of centering the school around kids is, honestly, it kind of comes down to the statement that we often tell people is, if your school is more about adults than it is about kids, you're doing it wrong, right? But at the same time, you still have to support those adults in that space to make sure that they know and understand that you value them and you want them to grow just as much. And when you allow them to own their learning, then they allow students to own their learning because they know what it feels like. And if they don't, you can have a really good conversation with them about the idea that, we're here for learning. We're all here to learn, and we allow you to own your learning. What would that look like for kids? So it gives you the entry into the door that you really need to be in when it comes to having conversations about what that environment looks like. And if we center the school around what those kids, when kids walk out, that they feel like they can take on the world, or they can, that their worth is going to be, that somebody's going to discover their worth, then we have a completely different conversation about what that looks like in the classroom. And that's exciting because we've seen our adults transition to, and it's taken 5 years. I mean, it takes a while because they've been just knocked down so much that, like when we started doing ownership of learning, everybody kept saying, well, I wonder what Joe wants. I wonder what the principal wants. I wonder what, I wonder. And now it's like, well, if they know that, if it's making them better, then it's going to be accepted. Now they know that, and that's what they do. So they're not nearly keeping stuff close to the vest at all.
Can you think of, not to put you on the spot, but if you think back to your past 7 years in your role, if you had to think of a teacher, an experience, or something that you saw that kind of exemplifies that in your district, can you think of one off the top of your head?
Yeah, absolutely. So we had last year, I had two teachers, an 8th grade teacher and a 4th grade teacher, and they came to me one day and they said, for their passion project, because we treat professional development like Genius Hour in our school district. Like, you pick your passion and you go get better, right? So they said, we want robotics. We want 2 robotics kits. And I'm like, awesome. Tell me why. And they were telling me, like, well, we want the kids to be able to code this and code that, and it thought it'd be really cool. I said, well, okay, that sounds fantastic. Tell me how you're learning in that process. And then we talked a little bit more about it. Like, you know what? We've got like 10 spheros here, those little robotic ball things. Why don't we start with that? Let's start with that, and let's teach kids some stuff. And then if you need a robotics kit after that, let me know. I'll get you a robotics kit. And then we talked a little bit more. And then I said, you know what? What if you guys want to do something together? What if the kids work together too? And they're like, oh, that'd be great. So they started talking about that. So then all of a sudden, these 2 robotics kits, then the next thing I know, literally like a month and a half later, they're like, guess what? They come into my office like, guess what? We're going to have a global Sphero Day where we're going to put, all the kids, 8th grade kids and 4th grade kids in a gym. We're going to make the octagon of death. And then they're going to have these spheres. They're going to drive them. And then they're going to have balloons on the back. And they're going to try to pop each other's balloons. And then guess what? Then it's going to get even better because we're going to live stream it all day. And I'm like, all from 2 robotics kits, man. All from 2 robotics kits.
That's awesome.
It's awesome. And they're doing it. You guys can watch. It's actually on the 19th, I think. I'll make sure that I get the date for you. But it's coming up in April, Global Sphero Day, 2nd annual Global Sphero Day, where we're just going to have kids playing with spheros all day and busting each other up and like doing coding, and parents are gonna watch the stream. Then we're gonna get grandparents to watch from Colorado, and they're gonna be all jacked up about it. It's gonna be killer. I can't wait.
That's awesome, and it's all because you talk them through the process and give them the initiative, and they feel supported to do that. And my favorite part of that is the 8th graders with the 4th graders, because it's giving them that kind of introductory leadership role. They're having an opportunity. I'm sure that they step in and they're helping the kids that are younger than them as they're moving through this process. So definitely send us that link so we can watch that.
Yeah, you're gonna love it. It's legit. Like, the kids get really into it, and they build these. And this year they're creating their chariots that go on the spheres. They're creating them with 3D printers because that was the next step. They're like, hey, can we get a 3D printer? Well, yes, you can. Absolutely, if you tell me what you're going to use it for. And they're like, yeah, let's do this. Here we go. And then you go to, then after you do that, then you go to a local business like Spectrum Industries and you say, hey, what are you guys doing? And they're like, hey, we got some stuff. We can give you this stuff. Hey, all right. Now we're in it. Now the Global Sphere Day also connects the community. And now we own it. And it's legit.
We could probably follow that at what's on Jimmy's t-shirt.
Yeah, go Crickets, baby. That's what I'm talking about.
You are right there.
Joe, that's a great example of one of your hacks. And you mentioned in your book that these leadership hacks should not be something else, but rather something that's prioritized in a leader's schedule. And Jimmy, I was listening to one of your recent podcasts, and you talked about how distributed leadership is really almost a survival tactic. Can either of you guys give us examples of those management type tasks that have really just fallen by the wayside or have been adjusted so that you've been able to implement your hacks and your distributed leadership methods?
So, Jimmy, I'm going to answer this one because I got to go get Allie. She's at gymnastics. So I'm going to answer this one and then bust if that works for you guys. And then you guys can let Jimmy take you home because he's much more interesting than I am. So here's one of the things that I'll tell you. When it comes to the management stuff, like you ever see that graphic where it said like the difference between like leader and boss and the leaders in the back or the front? Like, I think you have to have both. Like, you have to be able to manage. Like, it's nice to go over and lead and throw a bunch of great quotes out there, but if people don't get paid, they're going to get hacked off, man. So you got to be able to manage some stuff too. And one of the things that's really important, like I always think about it this way: people time, people before tool. So I'll spend an inordinate amount of time in hallways and classrooms and out and about, so I'm seen during the day. And then when it gets a little bit quieter, then I do stuff in my office that I know that I probably could do during the day, but I'm not going to have those people at night to be able to connect with. So it's much more important for me. The managerial stuff kind of gets pushed, but it's also a choice. It's a choice to either do it after school or get your tail out of bed in the morning and get there before people show up and do that stuff before you go walking through halls. And from a management standpoint, like those notes that I write and that kind of thing, writing 2 notes and taking them out to deliver them, that gets me out into that world. That's management. That's part of the management process, is to actually do things that's logistically going to get you into a different place. And so that's kind of how I would explain it. But I'm going to let you guys take it home with Jimmy. My man's going to take care of you. And you guys let me know if you need anything else, all right?
Thanks, Joe. We appreciate it, Joe.
Take care. Do I have to say go Eagles? I don't have to say that, right?
No, you don't.
Okay. I saw Brian over there. I'm like, all right, I'll say go Crickets on the way out. Go Crickets, people. Have a good day, everybody.
See you, Jimmy.
Take care, buddy.
No.
Sorry, Joe.
Holy moly.
Joe.
That's awesome stuff. So, well, hi, Brian. Thank you for sharing that. And again, my condolences that you had to listen to that podcast. So hopefully you got one thing out of it. I actually sat and listened to the whole thing. So, it's funny, right? Because Joe makes a couple really good points there. And, I think that's the toughest thing about leadership. It's just so complex, right? It really is. And like I shared earlier, I think some of the biggest challenges that come with that is it takes a tremendous skill set these days. I don't know. I think back when I went to school in the 70s and the 80s, and I think leadership just looked different then. Sure, we had people leading schools and so forth, but it was different from a standpoint. I felt like all my principals were kind of disciplinarians and all my principals were managers, and, it's just a different era. And there's such more of an emphasis on leadership these days. And so I just go back to how are we going to build our capacity? And, I wrote a blog post recently, said, we all have the capacity to lead, so why don't we all lead, right? And there's lots of reasons for that. And so I think one of the things from a principal standpoint is just to remember that you cannot do this job alone. And if you try to do it, I felt like I had a lot of passion, a lot of energy, very enthusiastic. I didn't felt like I needed to sleep. I felt like I was a workaholic. I wanted to invest in my school. I wanted to make it the best I could. But, when you're young and you're trying to establish yourself in terms of a leader, you kind of forget that, you're kind of naive. You haven't matured in terms of really understanding what the position entails. So, even though I had all those things and felt like I could do it, what you don't even realize is why you're in it, that it's coming at a really heavy price, right? You know, that's why I say leadership is never meant to be a committee of one. And if we can't help our leaders understand that they're going to be much more effective and be able to sustain and not only be more effective, but over a longer period of time, those who try to do it on their own will eventually figure out that it comes at a really heavy price. And that price is either your family or your health. And both of those are loser deals. And so, you know, as I matured in the role, I just got to the point where I understood that I could do more if I helped build other leaders. And Jessica, you said something earlier that just resonated with me, because that's how I see, and, you know, still my role, that's how I saw my role as a principal, especially the last 10 years, was I kind of saw myself as a community builder. And more importantly, I tried to build communities that currently didn't exist. And the only way to do that is to bring a group of people together and share a vision, and then get feedback, have a dialogue, and then really take action to inspire others to be more and do more than they ever thought possible. And that's really where Culturize came from, is that this notion of we're community builders as leaders, and that everybody in the organization, if we can help develop their skills and build our capacity, how awesome would all of our organizations be if everybody really felt that they played a role in terms of a leadership role, that they knew that if they invested in something, and not buy in. I hear people say that a lot. Well, how do you get people to buy in? And I don't like that. I know it's semantics, but it seems so compliant to me. If you buy in, you're like complying with something. And it's really, to me, culturizing schools is really getting people to invest and believe in what they're doing. And when you surround yourself with people who have that same mindset, it actually becomes a lot of fun, right? People look forward to it. And Brian, when I think about leadership, one of the biggest areas that we see all the time that people struggle with is this whole notion of change. And it bothers me, I have to tell you that, because I think we kind of do it to ourselves in this profession. That I can't tell you how many times people say, well, our teachers hate change and my teachers don't like change. And I feel like we have to stop saying that. That's detrimental to our profession. It's almost insulting to a teacher. Think about that. How insulting is it to say to an educator that they don't like change and they don't want to change? You mean to tell me you went into this profession when you were 21, 22, 23, and you really thought that for the next 30 years it was going to be exactly the same way, that nothing was ever going to change? No. You know what our teachers don't like? They don't like the fact that they don't have the resources. They don't have the support. They don't have an investment from their administrator. They don't believe that they're surrounded by other colleagues who want what they want. They don't believe that they're given the proper time. And you know what? If we're going to keep asking people to change, what are we taking off their plate? And so it's not that they don't want to change. It's just that the environment that we've created for that change to happen is honestly already defeated before it ever starts. And so people have just kind of lost that hope. And that, again, was the whole reason of writing the book, is to inspire people back to say, you know what, it doesn't have to be that way. I've seen organizations that are not that way. And so what is the difference? What's happening in those organizations? And so I think what they've done is figured out that they can shift their culture by really investing in one another, focusing on those relationships, and really building their capacity where everybody in the system and the organization truly believes that what they do matters. And that's pretty good. If you look at the research today, why people are leaving the profession, it isn't because they're not paid enough. It isn't because the fact that they don't think that they can make a difference. That's not the reason. That's not the main reason. I'm sure there are people leaving for that. But the main reason people leave the profession is because they don't feel challenged. They don't feel validated. They don't feel appreciated. And they don't feel like collectively they no longer can come together and what they're doing doesn't really have any significance. So how do we get people to continue to grow and develop? People want to get better. I don't believe that any teacher went into this profession to be average. Nobody woke up one day and said, you know what, I don't really care anymore. I don't really want to work that hard. No, I think over time, they begin to lose hope and faith that and start falling trap into a system that is honestly average. And so we have to create systems now that are no longer going to tolerate that and really inspire people to say, you know what, you can be excellent. And more importantly, we can surround you with excellence. And the only way to do that is to really help grow and develop people's skill sets in doing that. So
well, and
I get pretty fired up about this because it's something that just, it resonates. It bothers me because I just think we can be so much better. And I don't know why we accept the status quo. It just doesn't make sense to me. But I think, you know, again, I think people fall into that trap, and I don't think they like it. They just don't know how to get out of it. Mm-hmm. And so, and that's what, you know, we try to do right now today is try to go around and help people realize that they can be great again.
Well, and I think it comes back to that consistency thing. You know, what small steps can you as an administrator or a teacher put in place to make tomorrow better? And can you do that small step the next day and the next day? You know, no one's going to wake up after listening to this and then, you know, flip the ship and everything's going to be totally different at their school day tomorrow. And I think that consistency message that both you and Joe echoed is so important. And I mean, don't our kids today more than ever need that type of environment in their school systems?
Absolutely. And Jessica, think of it this way. You know, this is what I try to share with people today. And I know they get overwhelmed. So I often ask people, where does average currently exist in your organization? And if we're honest about it, we could create a pretty long list. We really could. And then I think when people create that list, they get really overwhelmed because they think, well, I don't even know where to start, right? Where do I start? And teachers will come to me privately and say, Jimmy, I don't want to be average, but my principal's average. And principals come to me and say, Jimmy, I don't want to be average, but my superintendent is average. And superintendents come to me and say, Jimmy, I don't want to be average, but my board is average, right? It's like we're always putting it on somebody else. And my point is, but you can do something about that, right? You can do something about that. And so if I'm in a classroom with students, or I'm a principal in a building with teachers, or I'm a superintendent in a district with principals, I tell them this, just focus on one average a semester. If you think about that, that is really doable, but not by yourself. So the idea, again, of culturizing is bring a group of people together, share a vision, some thoughts and ideas that you have. And I'll sidetrack here just for a second, because Jessica, when you talked about coming in, here's what people never taught me. Like, I had no idea in my first, again, dozen years that I never thought as a leader that I needed to have a process, a framework, or how to develop a system. Nobody ever taught me that. So one day I'm this way, next day it's this way, another day it's this way. Oh, I feel today like I'm going to do this. Oh, what's the flavor of the day today? I think I'll go do this, right? I have no system or framework from which I operate from. And so eventually over time, with really good mentors and people that I surrounded myself who taught me and I listened, was, Jimmy, you don't have what's your process for that? What's your framework? And I'd be, what do you mean my framework? Oh, this is what we do. Yeah, but it doesn't look like that the next time. So you really don't have a process. You just, depending on how what you feel that day or that week or that month. And so I started changing my mindset to develop more process and framework. So the reason I bring that up is because when we talk about change, what is our process for change? And if we're not consistent with that, then people have no idea what to expect. They don't know whether you're coming or going or what's it going to look like today. It's going to look different next semester. So if we could come up with a process, and so, you know, we started implementing processes for change. What does that look like? So the idea is to bring a group of people together and have a process to how to have feedback. What does that look like? How do you present an idea? How do you listen? How do you ask appropriate questions? Like, all of us that are leaders win in this job because we want to fix everything. Like, oh, I want to fix everything, right? Well, we fall into that trap because the more we become fixers, the more people are going to allow us to fix things, right? Well, now what happens? Well, there's no ownership. There's no investment. And when it doesn't work out, they're going to blame you, right? They're going to blame me, the leader. But man, did I love being the hero, right? Oh, let me fix it. I can do it better. Oh, it feels good when people say, oh, thank you so much. But I'm never building my capacity because I just keep taking it off everybody's plate. Well, again, you can't sustain that over long periods of time. And so we had to figure out how do we turn it around and ask better questions. And here's the question I got to the point where I was able to ask people is, what are you willing to invest to help me make that happen? Now it isn't Jimmy Casas having to fix that. It isn't Jimmy Casas having to lead that. It's asking them, what are they going to invest? What are they willing to invest in this to help me make that happen? My job was to offer support and resources and guidance and mentorship, not to do it all, not to fix it all, but to help build my own capacity. And I think that's where I matured as a leader. And once I figured that out, I thought things just started getting much better, not just for me, but for our organization and for our entire school community. And I think that's the skill that one of the major skills that we need to teach our young leaders is you don't have to do this all by yourself. It's not good, it's not healthy, and it's not the most effective way, and you certainly can't sustain it.
Wow. So great. Brian, anything to add before we wrap this up?
Really, if people weren't going to read Culturalize 5 minutes ago, then they certainly are going to read it now. So that's next on my list.
I'm getting on Amazon as soon as we get off.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
Summer, but I think I'm gonna go steal Rob's. I think I'm gonna go steal Rob's tomorrow.
You guys
He's watching.
Are too funny. Too funny.
Yeah. Well, Jimmy,
hopefully there's a couple things in there because it is written with the intent to be for everybody in the organization, but to give them some practical things to push their thinking, and hopefully more importantly is to inspire them to go back and say, you know what, maybe we can do this, and there's just a different way of doing things. And again, there is a silver bullet, I guess. I tell people the only silver bullet that I know is that if every one of us go in with the mindset that we're the silver bullet and are willing to come together, then collectively, I think we can be the silver bullet for our kids. I really do.
Wow. Well, I think that's a good finish right there. And Jimmy, thanks so much for taking time on National Championship night to be with us tonight. And hopefully, since it's a 9:30 Eastern time start, we're getting you out of here.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, Brian. It's a pleasure to meet you. Todd, Jessica, thank you so much. And if there's ever anything that I can personally do for you, if there's anything I can personally do for my leaders, I hope they won't, or my leaders, the followers on here tonight, I hope they won't hesitate to reach out. I'll do my very best to respond and be there if they need support or just the ear to listen that will listen to them, or some help to run their organizations or their classrooms, whatever happens to be the case. So please let them know that.
I feel like there's so much more we could dig into with you, and I'd love to do an episode. We're going to do a season 3 of this little show in the fall when we get back to school for the 18-19 school year. So I'd love to connect with you over the summer and schedule a time to dig a little deeper on some of this stuff, because it was just phenomenal, just the bit of time we got to spend with you tonight. So
thank you. Todd, I have to ask this question. Are you sitting in the bed right now?
I am.
I hope
you are, aren't you?
I hope Deb is watching. Deb Waller, if you're watching, you told Todd to change his location, and he never did.
Is it safe to say, Todd, that I kind of went to bed with you tonight? Because I feel like
it is.
Nice here.
Yes, it is.
Sadly, I think we all did, Jamie.
All right, a big slumber party, right? Big slumber party. So
and you have two dogs and 2 children and a wife.
I know. It's crazy what we do, right?
It's private area.
People only knew the things we do to help our profession. So
yeah.
All right. Well, God bless. Thank you so much. And again, if there's anything I can do, please do not hesitate to reach out. I hope you enjoy the book, and if there's anything in there that resonates with you that you want to talk more about, I'm always open for that conversation. So thank you so much. God bless. And thank you for being a merchant of hope for our children and for our educators across the country. God bless you guys. Thank you.
Jimmy.
Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Good night, everyone.
Well, that's a wrap tonight for episode 1 of season 2 of our Innovate HPE MOOC. Brian Robinson, our guest host this season, with us. He is an assistant principal at Cumberland Valley School District, one of the most talented young administrators that I've ever worked with in my career, which isn't super long, only 22 years. And he's doing great things in the profession. And Jessica Piccone-Cook, my co-host, which couldn't do this without her. She's a sounding board and so smart, as you got to see tonight. We're going to follow this up on Thursday night at 8 p.m. with a Twitter chat. We're going to use the hashtag #HackLead this time. You can also use Innovate HPE if you'd like, but I think we're going to stick with #HackLead just to build it around the book. And like I said, if you haven't gotten a hold of Joe's book yet, Hacking Leadership, it is a must-read for anybody who wants to be a leader, whether you want to be an administrator leader, Brian's got it right there, or a teacher leader. It doesn't matter what kind of leader you are. Leadership is leadership. And I don't know. I was going to wait till June to read Jimmy's book, but I think after tonight, I think I'm going to start tomorrow. So thanks so much, everyone. Next Monday night, we are going to have Mark Blanchard on. He is the executive director of the Cumberland Valley School District, and we always talk about kids getting jobs that don't exist yet. And Mark actually, I think, is one of the first in the country to be an executive director of a high school. And he'll tell us a little bit about what that means. And we'll get into some culture building with him next week. So on behalf of Brian and Jessica, thanks for being with us tonight. And we'll see you next week.